Uh, okay, I think we're live. Anyone who gets this notification can for this video can tell me if if you hear anything. I haven't done this for a couple of months, I think, so it'll be interesting to see who actually gets this. I know I've gotten comments before about people who but by people who say that they're not notified. Hey, GW. Well, at least one person, old friend from the meme stream, is here. Yeah, I'm always wondering. I had a conversation with someone on. There's a there's a there's a pastor named Matthew Everhard, and I was talking to someone in the live chat who mentioned that collaborating with other YouTubers, and I said I don't really put out much content anymore, like long form content. I just do shorts occasionally. I'll post little videos, some from the worship at my church. Sometimes I'll just do clips of things I see around New York City. Like I think the last video or the last short I uploaded was a guy skateboarding on top of the Bowling Green entrance to the subway station in Lower Manhattan. Uh, it actually is good for that in a sense. I know it's popular, but New York City does have a lot of filmable content. Unfortunately, in some cases, because there's so much crazy things happening, especially around subways and buses and mass transit. As you've probably heard, for those of you, uh, unlike us who don't live in New York, but even outside, I'm sure it's probably national news by now. Um, I know that the congressmen from here were or congresswoman were making a huge stink about this. The fact that they're basically trying to railroad this guy who was an ex-marine who put a chokehold on Jordan Neeley. Yeah, public. That's the thing. Public transportation is a good, but it's not. I don't think it's an unqualified good. It really depends. I mean, there are some downsides definitely to living in a place where you can't living somewhere that you can't navigate without a car. I've come to appreciate that, but there are also downsides to relying on mass transit. I think the one of the reasons New York City was so because I don't think people realize this before during the 80s, 70s, and 80s, there was actually a decline in population. And I think in the 80s, even like the population growth wasn't that significant because there was so much urban decay. So a lot of and eventually certain people grew to resent this, the particularly the gentrification of certain neighborhoods in New York City, but that was a consequence of the city being safer in a sense that you could actually I mean, because that's one of the things you need to be able to travel to your business or to your work in relative safety. That was why I don't know if you saw this. There was a video by Emma Vigland who was I think she was a Democratic strategist that eventually she was hired by Sam Cedar, one of the most obnoxious people on the planet, for his podcast, Majority Report. But I think she was also involved in the Young Turks. But there's a viral clip of her, and I think it became viral because Ben Shapiro dunked on her, where she's saying that she's insinuating that if you don't want to be harassed and disturbed during your commute to work, that you're bourgeois, whatever that implies. I suppose it's just having standards for having standards of normality. Like you look at you look at the train or the bus or the ferry, you look at it as a means, a conveyance, like a means to get from point A to B. And whether you read or listen to music or just sleep, you want to your objective is to go to your place of employment, to go from your house or your apartment to where you work and then come back. Yeah, that's the interesting thing. It was kind of bourgeois to be conceited enough to to dismiss people's concerns. I mean, you're especially if you're a particularly vulnerable population. If you're a small elderly Asian woman or or a Hasidic woman who essentially has no real defense if an aggressive, violent, perhaps mentally ill, perhaps just sadistic, tall man starts menacing you, you don't that's you don't really have the luxury of being you don't really have the luxury of being a dismissive liberal about a progressive about these things. You have to concern yourself with not being assaulted, because that's the implication. Like, I mean, this was one of the things New York City focused on was quality of life. And I think when people look at that phrase, they kind of assume it's just it's just the government, um, or not even necessarily the government, but just it's just people being policed for completely trivial infractions, like jaywalking or I think, well, one example used often is fare beating, not paying the fare to get on the train. But quality of life is essentially it's the ability not to be menaced or harassed while you're on s- while you're going about your daily life. Yeah, they can afford to avoid. I think she said she does take the subway. So, in fact, I think that was her defense. She came out with a video where her and Cedar are talking about this, and I think one of her defenses was that she was attacked, or not attacked, but she was jostled by someone who was, I'm not sure if he was a panhandler or just someone who was disturbed, but she, she had been on the subway and been threatened. And her reasoning was really bizarre when you actually examine her statement. The reasoning she used, she essentially said, yes, this man, he was bumping into me and menacing me, and I was frightened, but that's just what you have to deal with. That's one of I guess that's um one of the things you have to deal with to live in a diverse, pluralistic city, which is not true. You don't there are gigantic cities. There are megalopolises, in fact. I mean, Tokyo is an enormous city. It's I'm pretty sure it's bigger than New York in terms of population and population density. And you don't have to deal with that. I think women, there is what you would call a sexual harassment or sexual pest problem in Tokyo because the subways are so crowded that men, but there's not people being threatened with imminent death by by mentally ill people on the subway. That's not baked into the cake for Tokyo. Uh, yeah, the idea and the irony here is that the no one is or very I shouldn't say no one, very few people online are saying that it's a good thing that Jordan Neeley is dead. Uh, Almost everyone I've seen who's commented on this has said it would have been preferable if he had been in an institution, some sort of either a penal institution or a mental institution. They're saying they're simply saying this is the consequence of not addressing this problem. So if you want to remove any sort of corrective measure in an institutional way, then you're going to be farming out this sort of discipline to individuals. That's the only alternative. There's no the alternative they prefer is to just let people be abused and occasionally be murdered by violent criminals and mentally ill people. That's their alternative, which for most people, for most sane people, is not an acceptable. It's not an acceptable consequence of commuting to work. Yeah, that's the thing. If the fact that they're essentially they're what they're doing is they're putting up this they're presenting this false choice where people are are either you're going to have people killed because of as a result of their actions, or you're just going to allow people to be abused interminably, which is not even. And you can look at the other example of the bodega owner who was simply defending himself, and he wound up stabbing a criminal who was going to beat him, probably pretty severely. Um, that there's you're not going to people are not going to complacently accept their own death, which is or severe harm to their body as a result of living in New York City. I don't think progressives understand that there are limits to people's toleration. Yes, if you have a random lunatic who's going off on a subway, yes, in most cases people would just go to another car or or wait for the next train. But if someone's if someone's going to attack another person, that person is going to seek a means of defending themselves. It's that simple. It's not that complicated. And the thing is, if you prosecute this guy, you're going to have to prosecute his quote unquote accomplices, the people who helped him restrain Jordan Neely. You can't. It wasn't as if this was some rogue individual who just went off and lost his mind, like some sort of John Rambo type. There were other people who also him wanted Jordan Neely to stop harassing and to stop making violent threats at other strap hangers. So I mean, that's an interesting dimension to this question. What Bragg is going to do, not only in his case, but in the cases of the other commuters who helped him restrain Jordan Neely. Um, but yeah, I mean, that's the upshot of this for me. He, whatever preferred solution you uh, as an alternative, you choose whether he should have been given psychiatric treatment in house or been confined, civil confinement, or been incarcerated. Either of those either of those solutions would have been preferable for him than what what actually happened. And the thing is, even and some other people have said that the idea that this is that you basically get what you vote for, that these district attorneys were elected democratically, and therefore this is the sort of environment that they chose to live in, which I don't think. I mean, there's a kernel of truth there, but I don't think it represents the full panoply. I mean, first of all, people. I don't think democratic elections are a necessarily an accurate barometer of what the majority wants, particularly in cases like a district attorney's race where most people choose not to vote. I don't think most people, even relatively liberal people, want to be in fear for their life when they hop on board the six train or in this case the F train. But the whole discourse surrounding this case is so bizarre, and it's probably foreign to people who don't live in a place like New York City, where you just have and you see this increasingly as the city is emptied out of working class, upper middle class, and working class people who sort of uh, wash their hands and move to Florida or North Carolina or other states. You see increasingly just a large contingent of people who are pro criminality. I mean, they phrase it the way they phrase it. They make it sound like uh, they're not pro criminality, but they are, because they essentially don't want people to be punished for the consequences of their actions, their violent actions. Um, yeah, I mean, Bill Maher probably would not go to that extent. Like, Bill Maher strikes me as just very, uh, I don't know. He strikes me as someone who wants to fashion himself a reasonable liberal, but the problem is this is the consequence of certain certain philosophies, not just with regard to criminal justice, but society in general. I mean, one of the a deeper issue at play here is the role of families and family formation, but you can't really discuss that without being accused of being chauvinistic and backward and retrograde if you emphasize the importance of intact families, uh, or if you emphasize the importance of the Bible. Looking, the fact is we're increasingly in a sort of a revived paganism where people simply do what they want. In fact, the flourishing of these Satan clubs, which are based on Aleister Crowley's motto, "Do what thou wilt." So this sort of the consequence of that philosophy. When you do what you will, that means any sort of urge, no matter how antisocial, no matter how violent and how detrimental it is, you're the only hindrance on that is your own desire, your own it's there's a confluence of factors, but I don't think any of them will be addressed by this sort of therapeutic model of criminal justice. Anyway, that's just my thoughts. Thanks, GW, for hanging out and contributing. Anyone else who wa- wants to watch this can watch it on playback. So that's it. Just wanted to get on, talk for a little bit since it's been a while. And I will see you next time, whenever that is.